Excellent. So Todd, thanks for joining me. I appreciate that you came all the way to the office here to meet with me, and we're going to discuss actually a little bit of a project that you and I have talked about for a while now. And just yeah, thank you. And just by way of introduction, and thank you for everyone for joining us. My name's Spencer Mott. I'm has been Chief Information Security Officer, now run my own little company, and we're interested in, or I'm particularly interested in, how to develop and further advance Chief Information Security Officers and the next generation of security leaders, knowing that I think that some of the fundamentals have changed and certain context has changed. So perhaps before we begin, you can tell us a little bit about yourself. I've known you for a number of years now. You helped guide my career with your wonderful book called CISO Compass, which I still refer to today. But yeah, so if you don't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been a CISO for a long time. I was a global CISO for Grant Thornton International, global CISO for Manpower Group. I did Medicare security with American Airlines, or I did Medicare security with WellPoint. I had a long career. It actually started off as a DBA. And then moved into security later on in my career. But I do podcasts, I write books, I do presentations. It's just a joy to really help share information, I think is what it's really about.
Yeah, no, wonderful. And I followed your career, and obviously since you've been publishing a lot of articles, I track them very closely and share them. I think a lot of people have benefited from them. But specifically, how did the book come about? Because I think that's what most people will know you for, from the events and from buying the book online, etc.
So it was a few years back. I was frustrated because I was looking for where's the book for CISOs, and I was actually under contract for a couple of years before I actually wrote the book. Before the book actually was written, because I had a day job, and I decided that it really needed some energy to it to be written. And so for the people in the CISO role that are experienced, and also those that are coming up in the CISO roles, where's the guidebook? Where's the playbook for what this job is? If I'm interested in this job, where do I go? And so I wanted to write just not another book. This is actually, I think it's my third or fourth book. I wanted to write a book that would be referenced, that would be useful, and also one that would be a structured roadmap for CISOs, not just my ideas either. So that's why I brought in 75 industry leaders and top CISOs to share their experiences, which amplifies the roadmap. So the roadmap is tied to the McKinsey 7S model, which was all about how do you achieve organizational effectiveness. And I said, well, if we want to achieve organizational effectiveness as a CISO, then why don't we adopt a business strategy that makes that happen? And so I tied all the security activities to that, and then amplified that with actual real results, real problems, not all successes that other CISOs were having. And that's why I think this has been such a powerful book. And I'm just grateful. I see myself as the mouthpiece for it, but the experience really was brought into the book by a lot of other collaborators.
Yeah. And I think we're going to move on to kind of what's changed in the terms of the CISO context, if you like, or the operating environment. But I know out of the 75, there were some very familiar names, still many of them still in the industry, many of them still on the front line. And I think it was, a very interesting approach to really to bring their thoughts and insights into the book itself. But are you finding that, some of the themes as you continue to speak with the network that was involved in the book are starting to adapt as the role started to change in any way? Are you thinking about, revision?
Well, it's interesting. I wanted something that was going to stand the test of time, and applying the 7S model, which is, to achieve your strategy, there's 7 things, right? There's system, structure, staff, style, shared values, and skills. And if we don't get all of those things right, that's where our strategy starts to fail. And so it stood the test of time. There's new things. There's always going to be new things. And there's things we weren't talking about. I think we know a couple letters that we could name that we're talking about a lot today that we weren't talking about a couple years ago. But even in that context, in the book, I addressed a sliver of machine learning, artificial intelligence, those different things. They were identified because they weren't new then either.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I mean, one of the things that I'm struck by is the expectation around what a CISO could and should deliver is only getting broader and bigger. And one of the themes that I know I've experienced throughout my career, but it kind of accelerated towards the end, was the amount of pressure that's put on that role. And I think not least because of emerging transformational technology, but the further encroachment into what the CIO would normally do. Now the data officer, you have to really be an expert in multiple domains, a great business person and a financial expert, but then of course AI as well. So with all this transformation going on, resilience is one of the big themes that I'm kind of constantly looking at. How do you make people more resilient? Because we're actually losing good people through burnout, or they're just not finding the role attractive anymore. Is this something that you noticed?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of commentary, I think, in the social media around burnout and the effect on CISOs and the job. And I think part of that is really due to the fact that the CISO has this role and the expectation on them that we're going to fill all those holes in the organization, and we're going to protect it from every place. But I know the old cliche thing that the hacker only needs to find one way in, but I look at this a little bit differently. It's actually a multiplied effect, because it's not one hacker trying to get in. It's all kinds of hackers trying to get in. And so that's what makes it's so difficult for us. And so when things fail, I think in part we define failure in the wrong way. I think failure is, somebody getting in is how it's typically defined. Like, how could this happen? I thought we paid you to put all these controls in place, right? Well, how much education have we done around? It's about resilience, like you talked about earlier. How am I going to help you get out of this situation? That's part of what I'm being responsible for. And I think, CISOs go to sleep at night not really knowing if the next day is going to be a good day or surprise.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. We seem to have gone through the phase. Well, let's put it this way. I know less and less CISOs that haven't experienced a breach, that's for sure. So we know this from an incident perspective is not less, it's only getting harder. We seem to have gone through that blame phase, or being prosecuted phase, to at least a degree of understanding that it's much about organizational resilience, the resilience of individuals involved in the response process, but also the ability for a company to recover or continue trading, continuing doing business, and actually making the right decisions. So I know you came probably through the technical pathway, but there's multiple pathways now to the role. But they all have some common attributes. Resilience was one of them, the ability to work under pressure, the ability to understand complex and technical processes. But, what do you see as those kind of common themes, especially as we enter this new world order that CISOs need to demonstrate to be successful?
Well, I think you hit on part of that, which is understanding your teams and actually being able to work in teams. One thing I've been very passionate about is, the Myers-Briggs, the DISC profiles, the Enneagrams, anything that helps you understand other people a little bit better and what their motivations are, I think is essential. And this is where we start to move into that soft skills training that's really needed. Understanding my stakeholders. When I'm talking to the CFO, do I really understand what the CFO cares about? Do I understand where their top revenue streams are? Do I understand what the constraints are? And I think when people typically grow up in the technical environment, we think it's about technology, and it's actually not. I look at it this way: if I had no investment dollars, but I had great technology, could I be successful? No. So how do I get those investment dollars? The good CISOs understand how to paint the picture to get those investment dollars.
Yes, I didn't come through a technical route. I came through I guess law enforcement was half my career, and then had to go back to school and learn the technical side to be effective. But I think we've all got our stories as to what did we carry over from our, the way we started our careers that were then useful. So I think, with similar backgrounds to myself, it was the ability through investigations to read people, to navigate, to get people effectively acting and behaving the way that you want them to.
So you need to be careful.
Exactly.
If I'm going to be interrogated or not, right?
Tough interrogation, just put you on edge. But I guess the point is, it's multidisciplinary. This is why I like that the CISO Compass looks at it from framework perspective, but there may be a need for each of us to amplify some of the domains to be fully rounded in their career. And I guess, have you seen or have you had feedback on how people have employed the book really to make themselves more effective?
Yeah, one of the things that I hear very frequently is that people tell me that they have Post-it notes all over their book. And that tells me that the stories that are in there are like, oh, I need to do that. I want to implement some models to automate some things. And here's somebody who's done that. And here's the pluses and minuses, the things that they tried, the lessons that they learned, lessons, that they didn't learn. It's helped some people decide whether they wanted to do this as a career or not. They've seen the book and say, well, I'm weak in this area. This is something I don't know much about. Maybe I need to go study that. And I think the difference is there's control frameworks out there. In one of the chapters of the book, I go through 13 different control frameworks. Okay, but the problem with the control frameworks is that they never really addressed the leadership level of how you make these controls happen. Now I see NIST. You can see the evolution of NIST took a step, and they have the govern, the section that they added in there. But it wasn't there then. So it's that what's amazing to me is that recognition that we need, that the leadership is so important. It's taken our career, it's taken this field a while to get there. But we also have to be realistic with ourselves as well. If we look at industries like finance, for example, they've been around for over 100 years, right? The CPA designation has been around forever, right? But the CISO role is really only 35 years old. 30 years old. So this is where we should be at in that level.
It feels a lot longer than that.
Yeah, it does. You feel like you worked there that whole time. Right?
That's right, yes, at the very beginning, No, I completely agree, and I guess, when you... Part of the art of being a CISO is psychology as well. You have to... I think you have to be kind of multilingualist, and by that I mean you have to speak CFO language, COO language, Chief Privacy Officer language, help the Chief Technology Officer be successful. So I always kind of look at the role and think you have to have at least a reasonable, respectful amount of knowledge about multiple different business areas. And many of the stakeholders you're going to speak to have little or no knowledge of your area, and that's just part of the deal of being a CISO, right? You're going to accept that. I think your book talks a little bit about this from the perspective of working in a kind of, especially in a large corporation, is, how do you skill up in those business areas? And I think that was one of the themes that came from, multiple of the respondents to the book, the people that you interviewed. But do you have any kind of recollection of, as you went through those 75 discussions with CISOs, any real aha moments that you hadn't expected to?
It was, I would say, I've been asked, before, what was your favorite? And one thing that we did is we took the CISO Compass book. We created a podcast called CISO Stories. And I don't do the podcast. The podcast is still ongoing, but I did the first 190 episodes. And it started out with the people that contributed to this book that helped shape it. I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to take this one page that I had them write about a topic in there and do a 30-minute interview on it and do a deep dive on that topic. So that's out there too, and that's available. So what was nice is that not just the content, but interviewing the people that wrote that and to get richer perspective on that. But I think one of the things that always comes to the top of my mind was one of the write-ups was from the first CISO, first state CISO, I believe, in the U.S., which is Dan Lorman for the state of Michigan. And he said that this was years ago, and he was asked to put Wi-Fi in his company, or for the state of Michigan in the conference rooms, and he knew this was a bad idea. As a security person, his technical thing was coming in, and so he went out, he did the research, and he had a whole stack of reasons why this was a bad idea. And he went to his CIO, and the CIO said, look, if you want to be the CISO for the state of Michigan, you're going to figure out how to put Wi-Fi in the conference rooms. Because I've been in a couple big companies, and she named off 2 or 3 large companies and said, they have Wi-Fi in their conference rooms. So figure it out. And so that was a learning point for him, that you can't just say no, and you can't just say, this is how it is. When you're given a business imperative like that, you have to figure out how to get it done.
Yeah.
And that's what he did. And he went to those companies and he figured out how to get it done, and make it secure. And it cost more money, but they were willing to spend more money because that was the business reason. And I think it's those little lessons that are what grow us as CISOs. And that's just one of them that we can start with that comes from that network.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's problem solving is one, and storytelling is the other. The ability, as I said, to speak multiple languages for multiple different roles, and then also to speak to regulators, to speak to shareholders, and that needs learning. I don't think that many of us had those skills when we started. So getting exposed to that, whether as a deputy CISO or ride along with someone that's doing that work, is critically important as well.
Yeah, deputy CISO, for example, this is where you gain all these insights. Talked to one CISO, some rather large organizations. A lot of us had coffee at those organizations, or may have had a Mexican burrito in those organizations. And he was telling me, he said, when he put somebody in a deputy CISO role, he has a 2-year timeline, because it's not fair to that person to put him in a deputy CISO role if you're just going to leave him in that role for year after year. And it does 2 things. It pushes the CISO to actually develop this person, and also realizing that person's going to leave the company or move into some other part of the business. Yeah. But that's what we have to do. We have to do that. And in return for that, your deputy CISO is helping with a lot of the stuff that maybe some of the day-to-day stuff that you're doing, that you can do some more of the strategic stuff that you don't have time for.
Yeah, exactly. You always struck me as being a pretty cool role, the deputy CISO. You've got all the fun and responsibilities, not necessarily the accountability. And if it's well paid, then maybe you want to sit in that role for a while. But that individual, probably right, is right in what he said. So, this topic of tenacity and resilience, and and hiring people that can deal with these high stress situations, especially if they're going to move into these senior roles, opens the discussion you and I have had about making the profession, the craft, more accessible, and looking into areas or cohorts of individuals that might not necessarily have come through an academic technical route, or law enforcement route, or there are some programs that do that, that will programs like Year Up, etc., that will find these individuals, young people typically, or people that have been in other careers, that can deal with the stresses and the complexities of the CISO organization. This is something that, as we look at the book, we'd love to, I think we agree, we'd love to take the book to a next stage whereby we open these learnings and these secrets, if you like, as to how to operate and be successful to a very broad range of cohorts. So I'm not, just from whether it's gender, background, but make it an easier entryway to the organization rather than just traditional routes. And I wonder whether you are excited about the potential of doing that, or have thought about it in the past.